It is not just a country on the map of Latin America. It is a living laboratory where power, the military, and immense wealth collide. Here, in the land of the liberator Simón Bolívar, history was written by the sword and maps were drawn with the scent of oil. From the unyielding Carib tribes to modern-day generals who hold the reins of the economy, this is the story of Venezuela, a place where politics is not just about ballot boxes, but a military doctrine and an unending existential struggle.
Before the arrival of Spanish ships, Venezuela was a world of contradictions. Along the coasts, the Carib and Arawak tribes dominated. There was no unified state, but rather a system of caciques, local chieftains leading tribal communities. Militarily, the Caribs were a nightmare for any invader. They were renowned for their fierce combat style and relentless resistance. Meanwhile, high in the Andes, the Timotoquica tribes offered a different model: stable villages, terraced farming, and advanced water reservoirs. This political fragmentation, despite its local military strength, was the vulnerability that later made the land a target for the organized military machinery of Europe. In 1498, Columbus arrived. With the Spanish came a new era of control built on two pillars: the church and the sword. The Spanish didn't just rely on military conquest. They used the Catholic Church as a soft political tool to pacify the indigenous population. To secure the trade routes of cacao and coffee, the colonizers established local militias to crush any rebellion. These militias were not just for policing. They were the first seed from which Venezuelans would later learn how to build a military organization and how armed force can protect the economic interests of the elite.
With the winds of the French Revolution, Venezuela awakened. Francisco de Miranda lit the first spark, but it was Simón Bolívar who performed the miracle. The War of Independence was not just a struggle against Spain, it was a brutal civil war. Society was divided. The poor and the enslaved initially feared an independence that would only solidify the dominance of local elites, the criollos, so they sided with the Spanish crown. But Bolívar's military and political genius shone when he offered them freedom for the rifle. He liberated the slaves to join his army. In the Battle of Carabobo in 1821, Bolívar crushed the Spanish presence. Venezuela was born as part of Gran Colombia before seceding in 1830 to begin a long search for identity in the absence of civil institutions. After independence, Venezuela fell into the trap of the caudillos, local military strongmen, each believing they were the rightful heir to the throne. Institutions vanished, and the gun became the only means of transferring power. This chaos peaked during the Federal War, 1859 to 1863, a bitter conflict between centralism and federalism. It weakened the state and etched one truth into the citizen's mind: he who owns the army owns the palace. In this era, there was no national army in the modern sense, only personal loyalties to warlords. In 1908, Juan Vicente Gómez rose to power, bringing with him the era of organized dictatorship. Gómez did what others couldn't. He established a modern, unified national army to end the era of caudillo militias. Then, in 1914, a transformation occurred that changed the face of the earth: the discovery of oil. Venezuela shifted from a cacao and coffee economy to a rentier state. Oil provided the money strengthened the army, and the army protected the dictator. The equation became oil for the military and the military for power, while the people watched their wealth being divided between the ruling elite and foreign corporations. After Gómez's death, the country experienced a brief opening, culminating in the first free elections in 1947. But the democratic dream was swiftly crushed under military boots in the 1948 coup. Marcos Pérez Jiménez ruled with an iron fist until 1958. He relied on the military and security apparatus to suppress dissent, but simultaneously built giant infrastructure projects to grant his regime legitimacy. His rule ended with a joint popular and military uprising, returning the country to civilian rule, but leaving a lingering question: can the military truly stay out of politics? In 1958, oil democracy was born through the Punto Fijo Pact between the major parties. On the surface, the rule was civilian, but the military remained a hidden player, tasked with crushing leftist armed movements influenced by the Cuban Revolution. Oil money flowed generously in the 1970s, and the people lived in temporary luxury, but it was a fragile democracy, entirely dependent on the price of a barrel of oil, ignoring the development of any other productive sector, setting the stage for the coming explosion.
In 1989, oil prices collapsed, and with them, the social contract. The people revolted in the Caracazo, and the military responded with excessive violence, leaving thousands of victims. This rift in the military's conscience gave birth to Hugo Chavez. In 1992, the ambitious paratrooper officer led 2 failed coup attempts. Chavez was imprisoned, but his image in the red beret saying, "We failed, for now," made him a folk hero. In 1998, he swept the polls, and the Bolivarian Revolution began.
Chavez redefined Venezuela. The military was no longer a neutral institution, it became a partner in the revolution. He nationalized oil, pumped revenues into massive social projects, and secured military loyalty by linking them directly to state management and the economy. Militarily, he turned away from the West, turning to Russia and China for major arms deals. He survived a foreign-backed coup in 2002 thanks to the loyalty of lower-ranking units and popular support, emerging stronger and turning Venezuela into a spearhead against American hegemony in the region. After Hugo Chávez's death in 2013, Nicolas Maduro inherited an economically exhausted state, heavily dependent on oil revenues drained by corruption and mismanagement. When global oil prices collapsed, Venezuelan society plunged into hyperinflation, widespread hunger, and mass migration in search of survival. As internal protests grew, political response shifted beyond elections toward complete militarization of society. The crisis gave rise to civilian armed groups known as colectivos, which became parallel instruments of repression, while the Venezuelan military remained the backbone of the regime. In recent years, political tensions escalated dramatically. Opposition leader Juan Guaidó challenged Maduro's legitimacy, sparking a fierce struggle for power. Then, in early 2026, the crisis reached an unprecedented stage. On January 3, 2026, a U.S. military operation in Caracas unexpectedly arrested President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores during a special forces raid, subsequently transporting them to the United States to face criminal charges in a federal court in New York, Reuters. The U.S. officially announced that Maduro would face justice on American soil and that Washington would help manage Venezuelan affairs during a transitional phase aimed at a safe and fair transfer of power. This development marked a radical turning point in modern Venezuelan history, raising profound questions about national sovereignty, the influence of global powers, and the role of oil and the military in shaping the fate of the Venezuelan people. While some in Venezuela demand Maduro's release as the legitimate president, others see his capture as an opportunity to rebuild state institutions from scratch.